Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Hypro Filtration Podcast, Factory Side Chat. Today's episode will discuss how can total cost of ownership be reduced by adding a kidney loop or offline filter unit. My name is Scott Howard. I'm the Strategic Accounts Manager at Hypro, and today joining us is Mike Flick. Mike, you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your history and how long you've been with Hypro.
Well, thank you, Scott. Well, I've been in the industry since 1996. I started out in the fluid power industry as a fluid power specialist. And since then, I've been in that arena for 20 years until I came to Hypro 6 years ago. And now I'm a fluid power and a filtration expert. And it's something that I really enjoy. And I think a lot of people will benefit from uh, both mine and yours years of experience.
Thanks, Mike, for joining us. And yes, your experience is very valuable. And one of the things I'd like to start off with is when you go into a customer location and you feel the need to recommend a kidney loop or an offline filter unit, how does that conversation first go?
Well, when I'm looking at a hydraulic system and their filtration needs, I always look and assess their current filtration system and see if they have pressure and return filters and proper filtration. And then the next thing we like to do is take a look at their ISO codes so we can make a determination on how clean or dirty their existing system is. Once we have that information, 9 times out of 10, the OEM or the original manufacturer probably either undersized or may have not put the adequate filtration in place for the machinery that they built. So when we look at that, I always like to make my recommendation on a fact base. So if we have unclean oil, I like to recommend a kidney loop. And kidney loops are very good tools. They come in many forms. They can either be a dedicated online 24/7 kidney loop that is polishing the oil every time the machine is running, or it could be as simple as a filter cart that we can move around from machine to machine to act as a portable kidney loop for the application.
So, when it comes to total cost of ownership savings, we're asking the customer to buy a new offline filter unit. How do you address that objection that we routinely hear, especially if we have a new relationship and we see that there is a need for it? What are some of the ways that you help the end user, the technician, realize that adding this will actually benefit their system and result in a lower total cost of ownership for that system on an annual basis?
So, one of the beautiful things about either an online or an offline kidney loop is it allows you to put a third party, for lack of a better term, to kind of do the work for the machine for of the sorry, to do the work of cleaning the oil for you. So when I put a kidney loop in place, not only does it continually polish the oil and lower the ISO codes, but in addition to that, it allows your current filters in the system to last longer. Because when you have cleaner oil, your filters have less dirt to catch. So if they have less dirt to catch, then they're going to last longer over time. And instead of using a very expensive high pressure filter or a large return filter, kidney loop filters are usually smaller and less expensive than the other two. So not only are you using up or using and consuming a less expensive filter, but also by having your clean oil and the oil, I'm sorry, by having the oil being cleaner, your hydraulic components last longer, your bearings last longer, your maintenance people have to do less emergency downtime repair, and they can focus on more preventative maintenance and forward-looking maintenance, and start actually doing the preventive maintenance instead of reacting.
So, in sizing this kidney loop or offline filter unit, we look at the reservoir size, And then, like you mentioned, we also look at the environmental conditions. Is it in a clean room or is it in a very dirty, windy outside environment? That is a factor in how many times we're going to turn the tank or the system on a daily basis. And then based on that, we size the filter housing accordingly because we want to start the filter element with a low differential pressure clean in order for it to be able to capture a lot of dirt and go a longer period between change intervals. So the customer, the end user, doesn't have to worry about changing the filter elements as often, so less maintenance hours involved as well. This is all part of our total cost of ownership management.
So yeah, Scott, I was in a steel mill the other day, and it was a very dirty environment with a lot of dust and debris in the air. And they had a 1,000-gallon reservoir for their hydraulic system. So what we did there was we want to size it for 16 turns a day because it's a very dirty, nasty environment. So what we'll do is we'll take our 1,000 gallons, and since we want 16 turns, we'll take 1,000 times 16 to give us 16,000 gallons of oil to pump in a 24-hour period. We'll divide that by 24, which will give us how much oil that we need to pump in an hour. And then we'll divide that by 60 to give us in oil flow in gallons per minute. And that will be our kidney loop pump size. And once we have that kidney loop pump size, and we have the oil viscosity and the temperature we're going to be running at, then we can make a calculation and pick out our filter size and make sure that we have the proper pump flow to turn the tank in 16 turns a day, and then that our clean pressure drop on our filter is 5 psi or less. This will allow us to make sure that the oil is clean, they're getting enough turns in a day, and that should be adequate to protect all their components in their system.
A few other areas that I'd like to hit on as far as benefits of kidney loop or offline filter unit is as we size it properly, as you'd mentioned, we then intentionally have the tightest filter element in the kidney loop for the system, whether it's a 3 micron or 1 micron or even submicron based on the application. So the kidney loop does the lion's share of the work in the system. I look at it as the polishing filter element that does the heavy lifting, which allows the inline filters to focus on internally generated contamination in the line. And so they last longer. But another benefit from that is because the kidney loop is online and operating, the inline filters, which are routinely the high collapse filter elements that are protecting a very sensitive component downstream, those are the most expensive filter elements in the system. High collapse means more material to manufacture. More material to manufacture means a higher buy price. So if we can make those filter elements last longer, that's a direct effect on total cost of ownership as well. And the other benefit with a kidney loop is we can shut it down and change the filter element without having to shut down the system. And so that allows production to continue and minimizes downtime for the system that it's attached to.
So that is correct. The kidney loop that you're referring to, the way I like to look at it is it becomes the workhorse of your system. And when the kidney loop becomes your workhorse, like you mentioned, you're using a lower micron filter, which is polishing your filter on a repetitive or polishing your oil on a repetitive basis. And when that's happening, your other filters are now becoming, as I like to look at them, as their guardians or their protectors. So your pressure filter now that is sending oil downstream, it's basically just there to polish things even further and catch any debris that somehow may have gotten into the tank or what have you. And the same thing on your return filter. Anything that happened out during the work, now that oil is coming back, now your return filter is just catching that debris from coming into the tank. So because your main pressure and return filters are now just acting as protectors or guardians, and your kidney loop is really setting the cleanliness level of your system, everything seems to last longer. You're using inexpensive, low collapse filters in your kidney loop that you can change as needed, and then your expensive, high collapse pressure filters and your large return filters then become almost something that you can, I don't want to say on a PM, but it's something that it can get you in between downtime, because that's the last thing you want to do as a manufacturer is have to take your machine down to change a filter. Where if we can change the filters on scheduled downtimes when we know, for example, let's say we know the filter is going to last 4 months approximately. That means when we're getting into that 4 month range and I have a 90-day shutdown schedule, instead of waiting 4 months, I'll change out those pressure filters and those return filters on the 90-day intervals. So, yeah, we may be losing a little bit of filter life by doing it that way, but think about how much production you're going to lose on just 1 hour for shutting down to change out a filter. So not only does the kidney loop help you with filter costs, hydraulic costs, bearing costs, because you're sending them cleaner oil and they're going to last longer, but think about your production time. Every time you need to go down unscheduled, it comes right out of your bottom line because it's product that you're not bottom line, but right out of your sales because it's product that you're not producing. So by able to make it to those scheduled filter changes, that's huge in a total cost of ownership situation.
One last aspect I'd like to mention on the kidney loops that we manufacture at Hypro is it's three-pronged purpose for using the kidney loop. Yes, it does the lion's share of the work, the heavy lifting, as you had mentioned, Mike. There's a couple other aspects that we like to point out as well. Is it's also the proper place to add oil. So
Mm.
you add oil, put a three-way valve on the suction of the pump. You can bring your barrel or tote or container to the kidney loop, and you can draw the oil through and push it through a filter element as you top off the system. It's a clean application. We assume that the oil is going to be pre-cleaned before it's even connected, but going through the filter one more time just helps ensure that we are adding oil that's cleaner than the system and not dirtier than the system, so that we're not adding to any problems that may arise. And then also an accurate sample port location for sample acquisition so that we can have data that's on the lab report that's actionable and trendable. It's believable. And so those are some other benefits of having a kidney loop added to the system. But on the total cost of ownership side, if we recommend a kidney loop, it is definitely going to benefit the total cost of ownership for that customer on an annual basis. Any final comments on kidney loops or offline filter units, Mike?
I can just say that I have several customers that have targets, ISO code targets in the industry of 16, 14, 11 or 16, 14, 12. And every time we've added an offline kidney loop or they use a filter cart, they are well below their target and are heading towards servo quality oil. And even if you do not have servos on your system, the cleaner your oil, the longer your hydraulic components and your bearings will last. And also, the cleaner your oil, the longer your filters will last in your system. And that would be basically the total cost of ownership of the filtration in the system. And one last thing I want to point out, that when you were talking about filling through the kidney loop, is for all those people who have portable filter carts that they're using for kidney loops, we always recommend when you're adding oil to your system that you use either a kidney, fill it through the kidney loop, or use a filter cart to top off and fill your system.
Thanks for joining us today. Please stay tuned for more Hypro Factory Side Chat episodes by following us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, or subscribe to our YouTube channel.